This is the Spotlight, and we welcome you to the February edition of the Spotlight, here where we turn the spotlight on the arts. We have a very dynamic show for you today as we celebrate all of the achievements of African Americans in the world of theater and the art. But before we do that, I want to remind you of just a couple of important dates. Tonight, at St. Lucie West Centennial High School, you can see Broken Magic, which is their play going on, and it's going to have a wonderful opportunity for your children to take pictures with all of the characters. It's going to be a fun night. So please don't miss that tonight at St. Lucie West Centennial High School. And starting today and throughout this weekend at Hidden Oaks Middle School, we have our district band solo and ensemble festival, where students in all kinds of ensembles playing all kinds of solos will have an opportunity to be adjudicated tonight by judges, and that's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And then on February the 20th and 21st in Vero Beach, we'll have solo and ensemble festival for our choral students. Wonderful opportunities for our community to come and witness the awesome work that's being done by our students in the arts. But today's show celebrates the achievements of African Americans in the world of the arts. A little bit about the story of the origin of Black History Month tells us that it started in 1915. That September, Harvard-trained historian Carter G. Woodson and a prominent minister, Jesse Moreland, founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Known today as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, that group sponsored the first National Negro History Week in 1926. In the decades that followed, mayors from all across the country began issuing yearly proclamations recognizing Negro History Week. President Gerald R. Ford officially recognized Black History Month in 1976, calling upon the public to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every endeavor throughout our history. Since then, every American president designates the month of February as Black History Month and endorses the special theme. This president, President Barack Obama, says, "For generations, the story of American progress has been shaped by the indistinguishable beliefs that change is always possible and a brighter future lies ahead. With tremendous strength and abiding resolve, our ancestors have woven their resilient dignity into the fabric of our nation." So this year's theme is a century of Black life, history, and culture. Because over the past century, African American life, history, and culture have become a major force in the United States and the world. In 1915, few could have imagined that African Americans in music, art, literature, and theater would have been appreciated by the global community. Confident that their struggles mattered in human history, Black scholars and artists used their talents to change how the world viewed African Americans. The African American of the post-World War I era gave the world a cornucopia of cultural gifts, including jazz, poetry, theater works, and the appreciation of art. So here today to help us recognize some of those famous African Americans in the world of theater and art, dynamic educator extraordinaire from Fort Pierce Central High School, Lisa Stewart, who's the theater teacher there. Welcome, Ms. Stewart.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Perry.
And Mr. Casa Jones, who's the dynamic art teacher and department chair at Treasure Coast High School. Welcome, Mr. Jones.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think both of you are probably making your third or fourth appearance on the Spotlight.
This is a hat trick that I am honored to be a part of.
We are so glad that both of you come back to share your knowledge, your information, and a little bit about what's going on in your classrooms as well. So, first of all, let's start out with having you introduce yourselves to our viewing audience, just in case there's somebody that does not know you. Ms. Stewart, we'll start with you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Lisa Stewart. I teach at Fort Pierce Central High School. I am in year 13 at Fort Pierce Central. I teach theater arts, and I have an amazing community academic community and great students. And we just finished The Addams Family.
That was going to be my next. Go ahead. Tell us what you're working on and what you just finished.
We just finished up The Addams Family. And at this time, that was just amazing. It was a successful run. And
tell the audience a little bit of what The Addams Family is.
Well, The Addams Family began, of course, as a television show. And it featured a family that was Latino in origin, so to speak. And they functioned in a way that was offbeat and sort of just the opposite of conventional suburban life. And it was a very funny and, you know, in a sense, just it was a way of poking fun at suburbia. And they did so beautifully, you know, in their very gothic, bizarre, and spooky way of living. There's still that family, you know, where at the end of the day, the core values, love,
great,
respect, that kind of thing. So,
what are you working on now?
Well, right now we're working on getting our students ready to compete at the Florida State Thespian Conference in March in Tampa. That is the largest theater conference in the world that brings over 7,000 students from all over the state of Florida. And after the state conference, we're going to get started on our dinner theater.
Okay.
And that's a staple that we have every year.
We're going to have to make sure that our viewing audience knows about the dinner theater so that they can come out and support the fabulous work that you and your students are doing at Fort Pierce Central High School.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones, tell us a little bit about you and what's going on in your classroom.
Okay, my name is Casa Joe. I've been teaching here in St. Lucie County for the last 15 years. I'm actually a product of the county. You know, I went all my schooling here from elementary school to high school. You know, I actually started teaching alongside teachers that actually taught me. But things that are going on, we're doing a lot of things out at Treasure Coast High School as far as art. I have my first semester art show getting ready to go on display. The photography teacher, Stephanie Starks, we're kind of collaborating to put together a show at the Botanical Gardens down in Port St. Lucie. And of course, you know, the Believe concert with Amber Salo towards the end of the year. So we got a lot of exciting things coming up.
You said you're getting ready to do your first semester show.
Yes, sir.
Will that be open to our viewing audience?
It will be open to the viewing audience, but it's pretty much out at our school, and it goes on from opening hours to closing hours at the school.
Because we would love to make sure that our audience saw the wonderful work. Mm-hmm. Before we start talking about what we're on today, tell the viewing audience a little bit about what you shared with me on yesterday where I had to use my phone.
Okay, yeah, there's a new technique that I'm actually teaching out at Treasure Coast. It's called the anamorphic or anamorphosis, which is a three-dimensional style that was started pretty much over in Europe with some of the European artists. I think Julian Beavers, and he did the sidewalk pastel drawings that you have to view through a viewfinder, and these images come out with incredible 3D. And we're getting ready to actually do a show at Treasure Coast, and hopefully we can get something going at the district office as well with some of these, just to show how dynamic and how three-dimensional these images are.
I shared it with the superintendent on yesterday, and she loved it.
Okay.
Now, back to why we're really here today.
Yes.
We're celebrating the life and the accomplishments of African Americans in the world of theater and in the world of the art. I know some of my favorites. I know yesterday and today in both of those areas. But this is what I want you to start off by telling our viewing audience. Who is your favorite African American actress or actor?
Let's see, my favorite African American actor is Denzel Washington, without question. He is an icon. My favorite actress, African American actress, that's a tough one. There's so many amazing actresses. But I would have to say Angela Bassett. She's Florida bred, actually. She's from St. Petersburg. Mm-hmm. I don't think a lot of people know that, but she's from St. Petersburg, and you know, she is the representation of class and just an amazing artistic presence. And from what I've read and what I've understood, you know, she's just an amazing collaborator.
My second question for you, if you had an opportunity to be on stage or to direct one of the famous actors or actresses, who would you choose to work with?
Viola Davis.
Tell me why.
She is just phenomenal. She has a way of commanding a scene, period.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that my favorite is Diane Carroll. because
Yes.
she helped break the color lines. And of course, Sidney Poitier. I usually don't get starstruck, but I was in New York about 11 years ago, and he strolled right past me, tucking his newspaper, and I was like,
Yes.
and you know, I don't get that way, but he's just totally amazing and still so stoic and so charismatic even today. Mr. Jones, of course, you know I'm coming to you.
Yes, sir.
Tell me, who is your favorite artist and why?
My favorite Afro-American artist would have be hands down Charles White, and he's my favorite because of the technical aspect of drawing. I'm really big on drawing. I'm really big in graphite, charcoal, and painting as well. But those were some of his strong points, and he created images that were based on the social economic and social realism of our society, and I love touching on topics like that.
Also, my follow-up to you, just like with Miss Stewart, if you could work with a famous artist or study under that artist, anyone, who would it be and why?
It would probably be Mr. White, and because I love the dynamics of shading. That's what I loved about his drawings the most, and I would love to just sit down and then if I had the opportunity to learn some more figure drawing and expression and facial expression that he portrayed in his drawings.
Well, my favorite is Ernie Barnes. I loved his elongation.
Yes.
I love the closed eyes in the mirror, about being able to see even without the eyes open.
Yes.
And I hope we touch on Ernie today.
Yes.
Back to you, Miss Stewart.
Yes.
Let's and Mr. Jones, we're teachers.
Yes, we
So
are.
let's give a history lesson, okay? Let's start talking about some of the famous pioneers that paved the way for the Viola Davises, for the Octavia Spencers. So let's talk a little bit about Hattie McDaniel.
Yes, Hattie McDaniel was larger than life. And, you know, her performance, or the quality of her performance in Gone with the Wind, could not be denied. She was just as graceful on screen as well as off screen. And, you know, the interesting story about her Oscar acceptance speech, which was also amazing, an amazing piece of Oscar history, was that she could not go back into the audience. She had to go back through the kitchen, because that's how she entered. Because that was still, you know, the Jim Crow segregation was still a very pervasive part of Americana at that time. And yeah, that was what she had endured. There were, and again, Diane Carroll, Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, they brought nothing but exceptional quality in terms of performance, but they too had to endure a great deal in the lines of discrimination.
Just in case our
nature.
audience does not know, tell them what role she played in Gone with the Wind.
She was Scarlett O'Hara's nanny.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on the story about the kitchen, because I also knew about that. And she's the first African American actress to
Win an Oscar.
Yeah.
Win an Oscar. Yes, to be nominated and to win an Oscar.
Okay. Now, that's another piece of history and you've already called his name, Sidney Poitier.
Yes. Interestingly enough, he was actually born of Bahamian parents and moved to Miami when he was young. Apparently, before he'd gotten to Miami, I don't know if this is like a myth per se, but he didn't own a mirror when he was growing up as a child in his formative years. And, you know, so he already had an image of himself established before he saw what he really looked like. It's kind of neat. And he came to Miami, and, you know, he ended up working with and training with some of the finest people. Yes, he's known for Raisin in the Sun, but his ability to just explode on film was phenomenal. In The Heat of the Night.
To Serve with Love.
To Serve with Love,
Yeah.
which is actually my favorite.
My favorite as
That
well.
is my favorite
Yeah.
Sidney Poitier film with Lulu. It was amazing because, again, you know, you had somebody who was sort of, his character was plopped into a situation with a bunch of students in a British setting. And again, he was able to play that sort of that fish out of water, the person who was the lone person in a situation, but he did so with such grace. And it's interesting because the characters that he played also reflected the man that he was off screen. It's just his ability to bring people together, that charisma.
Yeah. Very debonair, charismatic, inviting.
Very inviting.
And he was the first African American actor to
Win an Oscar.
Oscar. So a lot of history
Yes.
there. Let's keep moving a little more present.
Of course.
Let's start with Viola Davis.
Viola Davis she actually worked in a lot of television roles. You know, she would play on Law and Order, and she played on different television roles, and then she was, in that movie The Help, where she was also nominated and recognized for her work. And that also featured Octavia Spencer, who again worked in television and film for quite some time. So what's really neat about these actresses and actors now is that and it was the same with the actors then. They didn't work in one particular medium. It was stage, screen, big screen, small screen. And so Viola Davis, now she's in a feature television show, How to Get Away with Murder,
Yes.
which is getting serious acclaim. Yeah, she's like I said, she's a force. You walk into a room and the room stops for her. That's just how she is.
And they were both nominated
for Oscars, and Octavia Spencer ended up winning the Best Supporting Actress Oscar for The Help.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to come back. We're going to come back. We're going to let Mr. Jones jump in.
Yes.
And Mr. Jones, I want to start with Jacob Lawrence.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about the life of Jacob Lawrence and why he's such a prominent staple in African American life of the arts.
Okay, Jacob Lawrence. Jacob Lawrence was born in 1917 in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And he actually served in the military as an artist, a combat artist. And his style, his bold colors, and the images that he created were based on just basically everyday life. His style was based on Cubism, which is a style that was pretty much created by Pablo Picasso and another artist named Braque, which is a really flat, two-dimensional type of style where the conceptual ideas were basically taken apart and put back together in somewhat of an abstract way. And some images were exaggerated a little bit more than others, but he was really influential in the art world,
Let's move into my favorite, Ernie Barnes.
Okay.
Tell us about Ernie.
Ernie Barnes was one of my favorites as well. Ernie Barnes.
Thank you.
Ernie Barnes was a painter as well as an illustrator, and his images that he created had the elongation and the sense of movement and the stretch and exaggeration of the human figure. His images were based on again that's typical everyday life. He wasn't too much on the social realist stuff. He did a lot of scenes. He was most famous for the Sugar Shack, which was an image that was created for the Good Times. It was just a sitcom that we all grew up on. And I don't know if a lot of people don't realize the actor Jimmy Walker, JJ from Good Times. He was an artist in the sitcom, and all the images that were painted on that sitcom
were Ernie
Barnes images. And the piece that you bought, the Maestro, okay, was actually an album cover. He did a lot of album covers for different groups. He did album covers for B.B. King. He did album cover for Marvin Gaye. And the Maestro was actually for a group called the Crusaders. And he depicted images where the eyes were closed, and he had a lot of significance behind that because I've read some of his quotes as to where us as Afro-Americans, even though we live in our society and go along in our everyday life, sometimes our eyes are closed to the realization of different issues and things that go on.
I did a lot of studying on Ernie Barnes and found out that Ernie was also a professional football player.
Yes.
He went 3 or 4 teams and hurt his foot, but he became an artist for the league. And he also did 5 drawings, I think, for one of the Olympics as well. So, but I think most of us will either know him from the Olympics or from Good Times sitcom. So yeah,
he actually did a piece for Kanye West. It's one of his most recent ones for the Jesus Walk song that he came out with.
And I want to think the Sugar Shack was also used as a cover
Yes, it
for
was.
an album as well. Awesome guy. Before we move to our local history, let's talk about your favorite, Alfred Hare.
Okay. Alfred Hare was a highwayman. He was one of the original 9, so to say. There was about 26 of them, I think.
About 26
together.
of them.
But he was an original 9. The thing that stood out the most about Alfred Hare was just he was a true fine artist. If you look at his style, a lot of his image was based on old Florida landscapes, ocean scenes, typical scenes with moss, trees, and it was interesting how he depicted light and how he experimented with color theory, and the perspective in his drawings were amazing. And there was a lot of influences behind his work were based on some of the things that Mr. Backus did, because I know he was a pupil of Mr. A. Backus as well. He was from St. Lucie County. He was a close friend of my father, Isaac Jones, and I actually brought in one of the Isaac Jones Sr., should I say. I actually brought in one of the paintings that he gave my father for their wedding.
Yeah, very, very famous in this area, the Highwaymen.
Yes.
If someone doesn't know, they were a group, 26 of them.
Yes.
And there's one female, Mary Ann Carroll, who's one of the original 9 that traveled the Florida coast selling out of their car. They mentored each other and painted extremely fast.
Yes.
Alfred Hare was the only real pupil that studied with Backus, but because they mentored each other, he shared his knowledge with the others. So very, very dynamic. And of course, let's get to Mr. White. I don't want to leave him out.
And if I could just add to Alfred Hare,
Sure you can.
One of the things that stood out with the artwork as well is the way they painted. Like you said, the fast style. I remember my father telling me how he actually watched these guys go in the studio and they would put up 10 canvases. And they would paint the sky scene on each one of them. They would go from canvas to canvas painting. They would put the palm trees, all these different images. And the next day, they're in their cars all up and down the east coast of Florida selling their images. But it was their images were painted on what was called an Upson board. It's almost like a panel board. And they had crown molding, what you would typically use around
in your house
as their frames, and they actually brush almost like a rust type texture around the frames. So that was something that was
using
really
silver or gold to kind of antique the frame.
Exactly.
Did my homework, Mr. Jones. Did my homework.
Okay.
Miss Stewart.
Yes.
Let's come back to you. Let's talk about Raisin in the Sun.
Lorraine Hansberry's classic.
Classic.
It's classic, and the original cast members, as I'd mentioned earlier, Ruby Dee and Sidney Poitier, were. It really, really brought some truths to American society. A lot of times, and I actually had the pleasure of staging a Raisin in the Sun 2 years ago. I remember you came to see the show, and it was a powerful cast.
I don't have a choice. I have to come see your show.
It's interesting because it talked about a family, the younger family, and how they are trying to get out of the current living situation that they're in and move to a house in suburbia, and the plot starts to unravel when Mama gets the insurance check from her husband, etc., and then so on and so forth. And interestingly enough, when I was staging the play, I had actually read, about Hansberry's motivations for writing the actual play, and it was based on a real life situation that her family had gone through when they were trying to fight against discrimination for housing, which again is sort of a segue to Thurgood Marshall and the work he did with Charlie Houston in Plessy versus Ferguson, which set everything in motion. Because a lot of the Brown versus the Board of Education, or Plessy versus Ferguson, that sort of stemmed from a lot of the case law that these lawyers had done, against discrimination for housing. That was a very, very big part. And A Raisin in the Sun, I think, was just sort of the prequel to what would eventually drive, the civil rights movement, which is, the biggest change, I think, in our society. And I think has driven a lot of, what we're doing and a lot of the successes. So that's just one play. Then you move over to, another powerful playwright in the form of August Wilson. Yes. Pittsburgh's native son, so to speak. And, you know, his depiction of probably one of the most famous protagonists in the history of American theater in Troy Maxon in Fences. And Troy Maxon is oftentimes compared to Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman, another American classic, but by Arthur Miller. But when you look at Troy Maxon and you look at Willie Loman, you look at two men who were born during a time, you know, before this country started going through some serious changes. Both of these men, Troy Maxon in particular, he had these dreams, and these dreams were bigger than he was. But he was also he was a visionary. He was actually before his time. And you can see the tragic pieces that unfold from that. You know, he could have been a baseball player, but he ended up in prison, and he had to end up getting this mediocre job, and he had this family to raise. And they started talking about, they made references to Satchel Paige and the Negro League and, you know, Roberto Clemente. And, you know, but then his son, who was the representation of the future, what America was getting ready to become, but his father wasn't there to see that.
Okay. Jones, let's get Charles White.
Charles White, born in Chicago in 1918. He's probably one of the most influential artists to me and for our country as well. And the images that he created is what really made me create a lot of the imagery that I create, because I draw as well, and I get really into a lot of the social realist issues that go on in our societies, whether good, whether bad. And a lot of his images were based on a traditional, old school style expressionism. So when you look at his artwork, you get a sense of feeling or emotions when you look at him. You know, that's the first thing you say, oh my God, okay, this is serious, or, you know, okay, this is what's going on right now, because he depicted a lot of things that were actually going on in society during his time. And with my artwork, I do the same thing. I depict a lot what I see and what we go through, you know, as Afro-Americans in my artwork as well.
Just listening to the two of you talk, it's been amazing. I can't believe 30 minutes is already over. So you have to come back and continue to share the history, the rich history, because I'm sure your students benefit from your knowledge, from your experience, from your passion. It's very neat to hear how you relate that artwork to lessons for today, and make it applicable to another style or another writer that may not necessarily be African American, but the comparisons, so that we see how the similarities and how they all have gained their popularity. To our viewing audience, you just had a touch today about Hattie McDaniel, Sidney Poitier, Viola Davis, Octavia Spencer, Lorraine Hansberry, Raisin in the Sun, and August Wilson's The Piano Lesson. When we come back, maybe we'll get to Taraji and to Terrence. We talked about Sidney Poitier as well. We talked about Jacob Lawrence, Ernie Barnes, Alfred Hare, Charles White. If we were talking about dance, it might have been Alvin Ailey, or Catherine Dunham, or Desmond Richards, or Misty Copeland. In music, it could have been Leontine Price, William Warfield, Mahalia Jackson, Duke Ellington, just to name a few, spirituals, jazz, and the list goes on and on and on. But from all of us here at the Spotlight, we thank you for joining us and giving us this opportunity to turn the spotlight on the wonderful work that African Americans are doing in theater and the art, and we hope to continue to bring this kind of dynamic programming to you again. Thank you, and we'll see you next time here on the Spotlight, where we turn the spotlight on the arts.